The frontier cares not for your name or past. It asks only this: will you break, or will you become as unbreakable as the stone beneath your feet? Eliza did not speak. The sour smell of cheap whiskey and sweat filled the Dodge City saloon. Her father, his face slack with drink, slammed his last card onto the greasy table. He had lost her. She stood against the wall, a ghost in a plain calico dress, the shame a hot brand on her soul. Every whisper and chuckle from the gamblers felt like a physical blow. Her world, already so small and brittle, had just shattered into dust. The air grew thick, heavy, with the weight of her fate being decided by men who saw her as nothing more than chattel. She stared at a crack in the floorboards, willing herself to disappear into it, to become as insignificant as the dirt beneath their boots. The winner, a merchant named Finn, with a greasy smile and shifty eyes, laughed, a loud, wet sound. He pushed his chair back and surveyed Eliza as a rancher would a prize heifer. His gaze traveled over her thin frame, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. He owned her now. The thought was a cold knot of dread in her stomach. Before Finn could rise to claim his property, a figure emerged from the shadows of a corner table. He was a Comanche warrior, tall and silent, his presence commanding an immediate, tense quiet in the rowdy saloon. His face was a mask of stoicism, his eyes dark and unreadable. He moved with a grace that seemed out of place amidst the saloon's grime. The warrior, Comanche, walked to the table. He did not look at Eliza, his attention fixed on Finn. Without a word, he dropped a heavy bundle of prime beaver pelts onto the table. The furs landed with a soft thud, their richness a stark contrast to the filth around them. Next, he unfastened a heavy silver bracelet from his wrist, its turquoise stones glowing like fragments of a fallen sky. He placed it beside the pelts. The value of his offering far exceeded that of a girl lost in a drunken card game. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Every man in the room held his breath, watching the silent negotiation unfold between the merchant and the warrior. Finn's greedy eyes darted from the silver and furs to the cold steel in Comet's gaze. Any thought of protest died in his throat. He saw no room for argument, only the promise of a swift and final end should he refuse. He gave a quick nod, his false bravado melting away. He quickly gathered the pelts and the bracelet. Comanche turned his head slightly, his dark eyes finally meeting Eliza's for a fleeting moment. He gave a single sharp nod toward the swinging doors of the saloon. It was not a request. It was a command. Numbly, her legs moving as if through water, Eliza walked out of the saloon and into the vast waiting darkness of the prairie, leaving the only world she had ever known behind her. They traveled south into the endless plains of Texas. The sun was a merciless hammer, and the silence between them was as vast as the sky. Eliza expected cruelty, a rough hand or a harsh command, but Comanche kept his distance. He rode ahead on his pinto, a silent silhouette against the horizon. His silence was not menacing, but heavy, filled with a gravity she could not comprehend. Each night he would build a small fire, gesturing for her to sit, and pass her a portion of their meager meal without a word. She ate with her head down, the food tasting of dust and despair, her fear slowly giving way to a weary confusion. He was her captor, yet he treated her with a strange, unnerving respect. On the second day, a cloud of dust appeared behind them. It resolved into 3 riders. Finn. He had brought 2 hired guns with him, hard men with mean eyes and firearms holstered on their hips. Eliza's heart seized in her chest. Finn rode up, his face twisted in a sneer. "I have reconsidered, savage. The girl is mine." He reached for his firearm. Eliza froze, a strangled cry caught in her throat. She was trapped between 2 nightmares, with no hope of escape. The vast, open prairie suddenly felt like a cage, its endless space offering no place to hide from the ugliness of men. The heat of the sun felt cold on her skin as she braced for the inevitable violence. Comanche did not draw his weapon. He moved with the speed of a striking snake. One moment he was on his horse, the next he was on the ground, his hunting knife pressed against the soft flesh of Finn's throat. The hired guns froze, their hands hovering over their firearms, their bravado evaporating in the face of such lethal speed. Comanche's voice was low, a dangerous rumble that cut through the still air. She is not a thing. His eyes, cold and dark as river stones, promised a swift death. He was not threatening. He was stating a fact. The two gunmen exchanged a nervous glance, their confidence completely shattered by the warrior's silent, deadly resolve. Finn trembled, sweat beading on his forehead. He stammered a promise to never trouble them again. Comanche held his gaze for a long moment before withdrawing the blade and stepping back. Without another word, Finn and his men wheeled their horses around and galloped away, disappearing back into the shimmering heat. That evening, as Comanche handed Eliza her share of roasted rabbit, their eyes met across the small campfire. For the first time, she did not see a captor. She saw a man who had stood between her and a terrible fate. She saw a protector, a flicker of warmth, small and fragile, ignited in the cold emptiness of her chest. It was a feeling she had long forgotten. The days melted into one another. Eliza's fear slowly receded, replaced by a tentative curiosity. Comanche began to teach her, not with words, but with gestures. He would point to the subtle bend in a stalk of grass that meant water was near, or the shape of a cloud that foretold a storm. He showed her how to read the stories written in the dirt, the tracks of deer and coyote, the passage of a lone wolf. She learned the language of the prairie, a silent tongue spoken by the wind and the earth. She began to feel a connection to the land, a sense of belonging she had never known in the crowded, judgmental towns of men. Her worn dress seemed less a sign of poverty and more a part of the landscape. One afternoon, while crossing a shallow, rocky stream, her foot slipped on a moss-covered stone. A sharp pain shot up her leg, and she cried out, collapsing into the cool water. She had twisted her ankle. Comanche was beside her in an instant. He gently lifted her from the stream and carried her to the grassy bank. His touch was firm but careful, his examination of her swollen ankle methodical and surprisingly gentle. She watched him, her breath catching in her throat. He was a man of the wild, yet his hands possessed a tenderness she had never experienced. The contrast between his fierce reputation and his quiet care was a mystery that deepened with each passing day. He gathered leaves from a willow tree and herbs from the creek bank, crushing them between two stones to make a poultice. He wrapped her ankle with a strip of clean buckskin from his pack. Later that day, as he carried her on his horse, they encountered a small party of Comanche warriors. One of them, a young man named Otto with arrogant eyes and a cruel twist to his mouth, looked at Eliza with open contempt. He spoke to Comanche in their native tongue, his tone mocking. Eliza did not need to understand the words to feel the sting of his scorn. Comanche's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence a wall against the other's disrespect. The encounter left a bitter taste in Eliza's mouth. The old shame, the feeling of being a worthless burden, crept back into her heart. She was an outsider here, just as she had been in her own world. She was a weight he was forced to carry, a source of ridicule among his own people. As they made camp that night, she remained silent, the easy quiet between them now strained. The small flicker of hope she had begun to nurture felt like it was being extinguished by the cold winds of reality. She wondered if she would ever find a place where she was not seen as less, as something broken and unwanted. The vast, starry sky felt lonely again. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows against the rocks. The heavy silence stretched between them. Finally, gathering all her courage, Eliza spoke, her voice a fragile whisper. "Why? Why did you not leave me in that town? It would have been easier. You did not have to do this." The question hung in the air, a testament to all the pain and confusion churning inside her. She needed to understand. She needed to know why this silent, enigmatic man had intervened, binding his fate to hers. She half expected him to ignore her, to retreat further into his inscrutable silence, leaving her alone with her questions under the immense, indifferent sky. Comanche looked at her for a long time, his dark eyes studying her face in the firelight. He seemed to see past the grime and the fear, deep into the bruised corners of her soul. He reached into the leather pouch at his belt and drew something out. He held it in his palm for a moment before extending his hand to her. It was a small hawk, carved from a piece of smooth, dark wood. The detail was exquisite, every feather etched with precision, its wings spread as if in mid-flight. The craftsmanship was a thing of beauty, a small piece of art created by a patient, skillful hand. Eliza stared at it, her throat tight with unspoken emotion. The hawk sees far. Its spirit is free, Comanche said, his English slow and deliberate, each word chosen with care. Your spirit is the same. It only sleeps. He placed the wooden bird in her trembling hand. The wood was warm and smooth against her skin. Eliza curled her fingers around it, the sharp edges of the wings pressing into her palm. His words echoed in her mind. A free spirit. No one had ever seen anything in her but a plain face and a slumped posture. No one had ever looked beyond the surface to the person trapped inside. This man, this stranger from a world she did not understand, saw a hawk where everyone else saw a sparrow. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. They were not the bitter tears of shame she was so used to. They were tears of a different kind, born from a startling, painful gratitude. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek and fell onto the carved hawk, making the dark wood glisten. She did not look at him, but she felt his gaze, steady and patient. That night, she clutched the wooden bird as she slept, a hard, tangible piece of hope against her chest. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, she did not dream of the saloon or her father's betrayal. She dreamed of soaring high above the plains, with the wind beneath her wings. They arrived at the winter camp, nestled in the protective embrace of Palo Duro Canyon. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat. Tippas stood like pale sentinels against the red canyon walls. It was a world of vibrant life, but for Eliza, it was a world of staring eyes. Some of the Comanche women looked at her with open curiosity, but others turned away, their faces hard masks of disapproval. Children stopped their games to point and whisper. She felt the familiar weight of being an outsider, an unwelcome intrusion into their tightly knit community. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, a flimsy shield against their hostile gazes. Oto, the arrogant warrior from the plains, was there. He moved through the camp with a swagger, his voice loud as he spread poison about the woman Comanche had brought among them. His words, though in a language she did not know, were like stones thrown in her direction. Soon, a respected elder, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and stern authority, approached Comanche. His words were sharp, his gestures angry as he pointed a finger at Eliza. He demanded that Comanche send her away, that her presence was a bad omen. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Comanche's response. Eliza's heart sank. She was a source of conflict, a danger to the man who had saved her. Comanche stood tall, his posture unwavering. He listened respectfully until the elder had finished. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried an undeniable authority that cut through the tension. He did not argue or plead. He stated simply that the woman was under his protection and that his decision was final. The elder, faced with Comanche's unyielding resolve, fell silent. He gave Eliza one last, hard look before turning and walking away. The silent judgment of the camp remained, but the open challenge had been met and defeated. Comanche had drawn a line in the dust, and she was on his side of it. Later, as Eliza sat alone near Comanche's teepee, a woman approached her. She was old, her skin the color of worn leather, her eyes holding a deep ancient wisdom. It was Comanche's grandmother, a woman they called She Who Remembers. She did not speak, but sat down near Eliza, her presence a comforting warmth against the chill of the camp's disapproval. She looked at Eliza, her gaze direct but not unkind. It was a look that seemed to see everything, the pain, the fear, and the small, stubborn spark of hope. In the old woman's quiet acceptance, Eliza felt the first, fragile tendril of belonging take root in the foreign soil. A few weeks later, Eliza was riding with Comanche, tracking a small herd of pronghorn along the canyon rim. Her confidence on horseback had grown, and she felt a sense of peace in the vast, wild landscape. As they rounded a bend, the scent of smoke, acrid and wrong, reached them. Below, in a small clearing, was a scene of devastation. A settler's wagon lay on its side, one wheel shattered. The canvas was torn and scorched. Near the wreckage, two still forms lay covered by a rough blanket, their presence a silent testament to a sudden, violent end. A horse with a shattered leg whinnied in pain nearby. The peaceful morning had been brutally torn apart. Huddled against the overturned wagon was a young woman with hair, the color of corn silk, her dress torn and stained with blood. She clutched a long rifle with white knuckles, her eyes wide with terror. Her name was Lydia. When she saw Comet emerge from the trees, a raw scream tore from her throat. "Do not come near me, savage." Her voice was thin and trembling, but filled with a desperate, defiant hatred. She tried to raise the rifle, but her arms shook too much to aim. She was a cornered animal, lashing out from a place of pure fear and unimaginable grief. Eliza's heart went out to her, a painful echo of her own past terror. Comet stopped, holding up an empty hand in a gesture of peace. He spoke in a low, calm voice, but Lydia only shook her head, muttering prayers under her breath. Eliza dismounted and approached slowly, her own hands raised. "We will not harm you," she said softly. "We want to help." Lydia's wild blue eyes shifted to Eliza, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You are with him?" she whispered, the accusation sharp as a shard of glass. Eliza nodded, feeling a painful split within her. She understood Lydia's fear, a fear taught to her since birth, but she also knew the quiet honor of the man Lydia saw only as a monster. It took time, but Eliza's gentle persistence and Comet's patient stillness eventually broke through Lydia's terror. While Comet tended to the woman's injuries with surprising skill, Eliza spoke to her in quiet tones, sharing her water and a piece of dried meat. She helped Lydia bury her husband and son, the shared act of grieving creating a fragile bridge between them. But as she worked, Eliza felt a deep unease. Helping this woman meant confronting the chasm between her old world and her new one. To Lydia, she was a traitor. To the Comanche, she was an outsider. She belonged nowhere. Caught in the crossfire of two worlds at war, they decided the only safe place for Lydia was Fort Richardson, 2 days' ride to the east. The journey was tense. Lydia rode Eliza's horse, while Eliza walked beside Comet. Lydia was silent now, her earlier hostility replaced by a wary watchfulness. She would not look at Comet, but Eliza saw her stealing glances at him when she thought no one was watching, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. The landscape changed, the rugged canyons giving way to rolling hills. Eliza felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach, with every mile that brought them closer to the world of soldiers and settlers. She was returning to the life that had cast her out, and she was bringing Comet with her. On the second day, they saw them. A cavalry patrol, their blue coats stark against the brown grass. They were led by a man with a hard, sunburnt face and cold, unforgiving eyes. Captain Sterling. They were searching for a Kiowa war party responsible for recent raids. When Sterling saw Comet, his eyes narrowed with immediate suspicion. He ignored Eliza and Lydia, his attention fixed on the Comanche warrior. A young lieutenant named Miller, his face still fresh and unmarred by the cruelty of the frontier, spoke up. "Captain, there is no proof this man is involved." Sterling shot him a look that silenced him instantly. "What is your business with this heathen, ma'am?" Sterling directed his question at Lydia, his tone dripping with condescension. Lydia, intimidated by the captain's aggressive posture, hesitated. "He saved me," she finally mumbled, her voice barely audible. Sterling scoffed. "More likely he was part of the band that attacked you." He made his judgment without a shred of evidence, his prejudice a shield against reason. Eliza stepped forward, her hands clenched. "That is not true. This man is a friend. He has protected us." Sterling merely laughed, a short, ugly sound. "All you women are the same. Too soft-hearted for your own good." Ignoring their protests, Sterling gave an order. 2 troopers dismounted and advanced on Comet. They grabbed his arms roughly. Comet did not resist. He stood still, his face an impassive mask, but Eliza saw the muscle twitch in his jaw. They bound his wrists tightly with rope, the rough fibers cutting into his skin. Eliza cried out for them to stop, but her voice was lost in the wind. She watched in horror as the civilization she had once considered a refuge revealed its true face. It was not a place of order and justice, but one of brute force and blind hatred. They were leading Comet away like an animal, and there was nothing she could do. At Fort Richardson, the air was thick with dust and the smell of horses and boiled coffee. Soldiers stared at them, their gazes hostile toward Comanche and pitying toward Eliza. Comanche was thrown into a small, windowless stockade, the heavy wooden door barred behind him. Eliza, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury, marched directly to the captain's office. Sterling was sitting behind a large desk, a bottle of whiskey at his elbow. "You have no right to hold him," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "He has done nothing wrong. He is an innocent man." Sterling took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes cold and dismissive. "He is a native, miss. In this part of the country, that is reason enough." His casual cruelty stole the air from her lungs. Justice was a meaningless word here. She turned to leave, her mind reeling, and saw Lydia standing by the door. She was clean now, wearing a dress borrowed from the post laundress. "Say something," Eliza pleaded, her voice cracking. "Tell him the truth. Tell him what Comanche did for you." Lydia looked at the captain, then at the soldiers surrounding her, and her courage failed. She looked down at the floor. "I cannot," she whispered. "It is better this way." The betrayal was a physical blow. Eliza felt the last of her naive hope crumble to dust. She walked across the dusty parade ground to the stockade. Through the small, barred opening in the door, she could see Comanche. He was not pacing or raging. He was standing perfectly still in the center of the small, dark cell, his back straight, his head held high. A bruise was beginning to form on his cheekbone where one of the soldiers had struck him. He looked like a caged hawk, his wild spirit refusing to be broken by the wooden bars. His strength, even in this dark place, was a silent reproach to the weakness and fear that surrounded them. She pressed her face close to the bars, the rough wood scraping her cheek. "I am sorry," she whispered, the words choked with tears. "I should not have brought you here." He turned his head, and his dark eyes met hers through the gloom. There was no anger in them, no blame. Only a deep, quiet understanding. "You needed to see," he said, his voice low and steady. And she did see. She saw that the world she had been raised in did not want to save her. It wanted to tame her, to put her back in her place, to reward her for her obedience. And she saw that true honor did not reside in a uniform or a title, but in the heart of a man they called a savage. Eliza's despair hardened into a cold, sharp resolve. She would not let them do this. She searched the fort until she found Lieutenant Miller standing near the stables, his expression troubled. He looked away when he saw her approaching, ashamed of his own powerlessness. She did not plead or cry. She spoke to him with a quiet dignity, her voice clear and steady. She told him everything. She described the tracks around Lydia's wagon, the type of arrows used, details that proved the attackers were Kiowa, not Comanche. She spoke of honor, of the debt owed to a man who had saved a life at great risk to his own. Miller listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Captain Sterling will not listen to reason," he said, his voice low. "His hatred for the native tribes runs too deep. But he is a soldier. He must follow the law, even if he bends it, and the law requires proof. He has none." A flicker of hope ignited in Eliza's chest. Miller was a good man, trapped in a bad situation. That night, a commotion erupted in the barracks, a drunken brawl conveniently drawing the attention of most of the guards. Eliza saw Miller walk past the supply shed and noticed he did not properly secure the latch. It was a small thing, but it was enough. Her heart hammering against her ribs, Eliza slipped into the dark supply shed. Her hands searched in the darkness, finally closing around the cold, heavy steel of a pair of bolt cutters. She crept through the shadows to the stockade. The single guard on duty had been called away to help with the brawl. She worked the cutters around the heavy iron lock, her muscles straining with the effort. With a loud snap, the lock broke. She pulled the heavy door open. Comanche stood in the darkness, his eyes accustomed to the gloom. He had been waiting. He knew she would come. He stepped out of the cell, moving with the silence of a shadow. "They will follow," he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "They will hunt us." "Let them," Eliza whispered back, her voice filled with a strength she did not know she possessed. We will show them what it means to be free." They slipped past the barracks and into the stables. Miller had accidentally left 2 of the best horses saddled and ready. As they rode out of the fort and into the vast, moonlit plains, Eliza did not feel like a fugitive. She felt like a warrior, fighting for the only thing that mattered. She was finally fighting for her own life, on her own terms. They rode hard through the night, pushing the horses to their limits. By dawn, they reached the precipice of Palo Duro Canyon, the great rift in the earth glowing with the first light of the sun. But they were not alone. Behind them, a posse of riders appeared, led by a furious Captain Sterling. "The end of the road! Savage!" Sterling yelled, his voice echoing in the morning stillness. His men fanned out, their rifles ready. This time, there would be no escape. But Eliza was no longer the frightened girl from the saloon. She slid off her horse and walked forward, placing herself directly in front of Comanche, a defiant shield of flesh and bone. "His name is Comanche," she called out, her voice ringing with clarity and conviction. "He is not your prisoner. He is the man who saved my life when my own people sold me for the price of a few drinks." She looked directly at Sterling, her gaze unwavering. "Is he the one you hunt, Captain? Or is it me? Am I the prisoner you wish to return to a world that sees me as property?" Her words hung in the air, a stunning accusation that left the soldiers shifting uncomfortably. She had turned their own twisted sense of order back on them, exposing the hypocrisy at its core. For a moment, no one moved. Just then, another rider appeared, galloping hard from the direction of the fort. It was Lieutenant Miller. He reined in his horse beside Sterling, holding out an official dispatch. "Captain," he said, his voice formal and loud enough for all to hear. "A scout just returned. They found the Kiowa raiding party 30 miles west of here. They had items from the settler's wagon. This man is innocent." A murmur went through the ranks. Sterling's face contorted with rage, his authority crumbling before his own men. He was trapped by the very laws he claimed to uphold. His hunt for vengeance had turned into a public humiliation. Sterling spat on the ground, his eyes burning with impotent fury. "This is not over," he snarled. He wheeled his horse around and rode away, his shamed posse trailing behind him. When the last rider had disappeared over the horizon, Eliza slowly turned to face Comanche. The sun was rising, bathing the canyon in a warm golden light. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. They stood together on the edge of the world, 2 survivors from different worlds who had found each other in the wilderness. In the profound silence of the new day, they had not just won their freedom, they had found the beginning of a life.